All right, CNT120, we're looking at Chapter 2 on infrastructure and documentation. So here we go. We're going to look at the roles of network cabling in a commercial building and the components and things that go with it, how we maintain network documentation, and how we manage assets on a network. So let's start off with the data infrastructure. Now, to understand what happens in a commercial building, we have to kind of remember what we have at home and start adapting that to what we have in a commercial building. At home, our networks probably look very similar to this. This is kind of what my house looks like, and that's probably the kind of thing you have at your house. You have your, Linksys, Belkin, Netgear, or Verizon router kind of things sitting here. And remember, as we talked in the last chapter, if I don't do it, but if I were to break that open, that box open, I actually do find in there a router, a switch, an access point, firewall, all in that box. So it's really kind of a network in a box. So that network in a box that we have sitting maybe in our living room, maybe in the computer room or den or whatever, I have maybe one or two things plugged into it, and most everything out is wireless. And the one or two things that are plugged in, I probably just have a small patch cable, maybe a 5 or 10 foot patch cable that goes from the desktop computer into that, or the PlayStation into that, maybe the printer into that. So I handle it with basically just a couple patch cords. And for the most part, the rest of the things around your house are probably wireless. And for our home, that works because we usually only have a couple things we're plugging in anymore. Most things we do wirelessly. So that's how we handle data in our house because we have just a handful of devices. Let's also remember how we handle power, the electrical power in our house. The electrical power in our house, the electrical power from the power company comes in from the street. It might come from telephone poles outside to the side of your house. It might come from underground. If you live in a neighborhood that there's no telephone poles, it might be underground. And that'll come into probably the basement area of your house to the circuit breaker box. And that circuit breaker box has a series of circuit breakers and switches that connect out to outlets strategically located around your house. And those circuits are there to basically distribute the power. Now, if I really think about that, that allows me to, take a lamp and plug it in the living room, or move it to the other side of the living room and plug it in. In my kitchen, plug a toaster in on the counter, use it, unplug it, maybe put it in the cabinet. In your bedroom, plug a TV in over here, or move my room around and plug it on the other side, or plug my computer in on one side of the room, maybe move it around, move the desk around to plug the computer on the other side of the room. It's allowing me to connect and disconnect from power in a built-in infrastructure, a built-in structure to handle power. Otherwise, I would have to run extension cords all over my house down to the basement. And that's kind of unfeasible, not to mention for many people that would be like, oh, that's ugly to look at. For a lot of people, that's a tripping hazard. Okay. So we don't use the whole extension cords, running around the house to handle power. We have the built-in electrical system with outlets in the wall that I can plug and unplug my devices from. So data in my house, I have a couple patch cables that I plug my devices in, but power, I have this built-in infrastructure. Keep those two in mind. When we move to data in a commercial building, we have many more computers than 5 or 6. We might have hundreds. Our 2 lab rooms at the Harrisburg campus, or 2 CNT lab rooms at the Harrisburg campus, between them we have 50 computers. So we have 50 computers, 50 data drops that we have to worry about. Well, I can't use this infrastructure like you use at home, just, patch cables running across the floor and plugged into a switch. That doesn't work. So I have to use a structure that's more like how I deal with power in my house. So in a commercial building, they've kind of adapted this idea for electrical power into a way that I can get data connections out to various places in my building that I can plug and unplug my computers from. That is how we handle data in a commercial building. Very much like power in your house, same kind of idea. And it's really because I have a much larger quantity of equipment that I'm connecting in that I need to organize and maintain. I don't just have a couple devices with patch cables plugged into my router at home. A couple patch cables with my devices at home probably works fine. I'm dealing with hundreds, hundreds, sometimes thousands of computers that need to be plugged in and organized. So we adopt kind of the power method in your house to how we hook up our devices to data. Hopefully that idea kind of like sits with you or makes sense, because then everything else we're going to talk about is based on that idea. So this chapter starts talking about just that. How do I handle a data structure in a building for the, hundreds or thousands of computers that might be in a building? So the structure is based on a standard, which we'll mention in a minute, the TIA 568 standard, that says I do data this way. I have a data closet with a patch panel. I run cabling out to the area where the computers are. I put an outlet on the wall, and that allows the computers to plug in and unplug from there. Just the same idea as moving lamps around my house. Plug a lamp in this side of the living room, or move it over to the other side of the living room and plug a lamp in. Same kind of idea. So if I look at this picture here, I see that closet, the cabling going out to an outlet on the wall, and the computer plugging in. Okay, this is that with more detail so you can see it zoomed in a little bit further. And then here is, if I start having more than one floor, I repeat this structure on each floor. And that's exactly what we have with this picture here as well. I'm getting that same structure repeated on the second floor, same structure repeated on the third floor. And that can continue on a couple floors. Or if I'm dealing with maybe a large high school that's spread out, you might have this in one wing of the building, and then this gets repeated in like the science hallway, and then it gets repeated again in the math hallway, and it gets repeated again in the English hallway, to handle all the data drops of the computers in those parts of the building. This can get repeated over and over again. And this is based on a standard, and the idea of a standard is if I do it a certain way, things should always work when I plug in. Okay, that's the idea behind a standard, and this was developed over time. There has been iterations from the 90s up to present day, different versions: 568A version, 568B revision, 568C revision, and 568D revision. That's the one we're kind of currently working on right now, or using now, as a guide on how everything gets cabled up. There are sections to it. There's the 0 section, that's kind of like general telecom. The 1 section, 1D, is about the commercial building, how you do a commercial building. 2D is all about twisted pair cabling, the copper cabling we use. And then 3D is all about the fiber optic cabling that we use, optical fiber. So with that in mind, how we deal with data in a commercial building, the chapter says, okay, let's start taking a tour through the building and stopping at the places as the connection comes into the building as we work our way out to the workstations. Excuse me. So I took their tour and I started adding lots of pictures in so you can see the pieces they're talking about. So the first stop, we're going to stop at the entrance facility, or what they call the DMARC. The entrance facility is just that, where the ISP or internet connection comes into the building, and I might have a significant amount of equipment here, servers and so forth. But the main piece of equipment would be the DMARC, where the ISP equipment ends and our equipment begins. And that might actually be a distinct piece of equipment. So if we look at a map, and I think this is the picture they have in the book, they show maybe in the building ABC of a company, maybe on a little campus. Think about Harrisburg campus. The entrance facility is where the ISP comes into the campus. Let's just say it's in the Blocker building, if you will, if you're at the Harrisburg campus. And then you start splitting that connection out to other buildings around it. Hall of Tech, or the Student Center, or the bookstore, those kind of things. But where that connection comes in is the entrance facility. And that can take various forms, but it usually is kind of like the main closet or the main data room of a network. So here's another kind of rendition of that. And then here would be that multi-floor picture I gave you before, showing this is that entrance facility right here, that room right there. Or in a building, this room right here. Now, the DMARC is literally that piece of equipment where the ISP equipment connection ends and our network begins. Here's a picture of a FiOS box that's in a basement. This looks almost identical to mine. It's not my basement, but it looks almost identical to mine. And the ISP connection, the fiber line comes into here. Actually, it's coming in this way. There's the fiber line coming in here. And then from here, you run your copper or coax cabling upstairs to your set-top box, your cable router or cable modem kind of thing. And this ends up becoming the DMARC, where the ISP ends and your network equipment begins. I think this is the picture they have in the book showing the same idea here. Here's the fiber line coming in. Here's your regular copper cabling coming out, going to your network. Okay, and that DMARC is usually, that DMARC equipment or that DMARC is usually in your entrance facility. Next thing we run into is the MDF, main distribution frame. This is literally the main data room or main equipment room in your network. And that really, in many cases, it might be where the entrance facility is. It might be in the same room. It might be just next door to, because the entrance facility might be a really small room, and you put the data closet next to it, this main distribution frame right next to it. And again, that's kind of what I'm showing you here. Here's the entrance facility. Here's your main distribution frame. That could be all in the same room. And in these pictures, they're actually showing you, here's your entrance facility, here's the main distribution frame. That's showing, server/phone equipment kind of thing there. Here again, here's maybe your row of servers or equipment racks for the building. It could look something like this, rows of equipment, maybe some servers in there, maybe a phone server in the back kind of thing. Here's a main server room of a company. Okay, it could be even here as well. Could be a room like this where you have some actually phone equipment on the wall plus your network equipment here. It could be racks of, server racks plus, data equipment in here. This kind of thing as well. Rows of servers and racked equipment kind of thing. That could be your main distribution frame. Could take a couple different forms, if you will. Data room would be the kind of like the next smaller room into your network. And it might only be this big. It might just be a handful of patch panels and switches in a closet. Well, that data room, let me see, I'm going to back up to the map picture up here. That data room could just be one of these right here, where it's literally just servicing that floor. Here, just servicing that floor. Okay, so it's usually less of equipment, mainly just maybe the switches and patch panels for that floor of equipment. So it's usually a little bit smaller, and in some cases can be really small. This is a little ceiling mounted cabinet that has basically one switch in there and one patch panel in there to service maybe just that room, maybe a large computer lab room kind of thing. Well, as I get to these data rooms, as I get to these equipment closets, I'm going to run into equipment racks and patch panels. Well, the equipment racks are just that, a place for us to mount our patch panels and switches, servers, routers, firewalls, those kinds of things into. We'll talk more about some details of the racks later, sizes and dimensions and so forth, but that is a place to mount all of my equipment in these different data rooms. And again, they do come in different sizes depending on what the amount of equipment you need to put in them. The patch panel is the piece that's going to connect our cabling infrastructure. It's going to act as that connection point between the cabling infrastructure and things like our switches. You could almost think of this as like the circuit breaker box, if you will, in your house. The circuit breaker box has all the outlets. It's connecting all the outlets back to the main power coming from the power company. This is acting as a connection point from all the cable infrastructure into the closet that's labeled, and then I can decide how I want to cable that into my network, into this switch or the other switch that's in the rack. And these patch panels do come in different size, conveniently to match up the size of usually switches that you're working with, 24-port switch, 48-port switch, etc. The front of it has all these ports on that I can plug a patch cable into and then patch it into a switch port. And the back has punch downs that allow me to terminate the horizontal cabling. So here's my patch panels here. The cabling coming from the work area comes in here and gets punched into that patch panel. And then the front is free that I can plug a patch cable into. Here's a patch cable that I can go into my network switch. Okay, that would be on the front side. So here's our horizontal cabling punched into the back. And then that leaves me room on the front to use a patch cable to connect from the patch panel port up to a switch port. So this is making that interconnection for me. And like I said, you can almost think of it as a circuit breaker box. Circuit breaker box, you're turning on and off circuits. Here I'm connecting or disconnecting a user from a network or changing how it's connected into a network. That's what the patch panel is going to do for me. We'll continue the tour in the next podcast.